Okay.
Yeah. Probably hear me anyway.
Probably.
Good morning. How are we? You will have seen me running 2 days this morning, and now I've got my other hat on. So here we are. I'll just introduce Milton, and he'll do karakia, and then we will get underway.
Whakatehau ki te uru, whakatehau ki te tonga. Kia mākina kina ki e uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E he akene ana te are a tākura, he tio, he puka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora.
Thank you, Milton. Now we've got a jam-packed morning, so we will get straight underway. And Simone Newsham is first up, the Chief Executive of the NZNASCA. Yeah.
Remember where I am and burst into song. Okay. Not that that's like. Tēnā koutou e te whānau, ki te pehe koutou e tēnei wā. Ko Simone toka ingoa no Ingarangi aho, Anaene anoho ana aho ki Poneke, ko Josh me Brianna uku Tamariki, ke te mahe aho ke NZNASCA. Nō rewa e te whānau, kua moto tōko mihi, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good morning, everybody. So, my name is Simone Newsham, and as you know, I'm the CEO of NZNASCA. So NZNASCA is the peak body that works with and represents the NZNASCs across Aotearoa. We have the Health Older Persons NZNASCs, the Disability NZNASCs, and the Mental Health NZNASCs. So I'm here obviously to talk this morning about the changes that have occurred in the disability sector. So I will whiz through some presentation, and then there'll be lots of times for questions. But I would say, none of the changes were NZNASC's ideas. Just putting it out there. Okay, so how did we get here? So I just want to give you a bit of background. So when I say none of this was NZNASC's idea, I just want to give you a bit of an idea of where NZNASCs have come from. So back in 2002, they developed an operational policy for NZNASCs. That's still current, in the most part. Bits of it have been replaced. 2005 is the date of the NZNASCA National Manager's Manual, which is the NZNASCA guideline. That's still current as of today. So we're talking about over 20 years old. This is what NZNASCA's got to work with. In 2016, that was the last update of the SPA that was current until just earlier this year, until actually 1st of April this year. In 2021/2022, NZNASCs had their budgets, yes, those budgets that NZNASCA's supposed to be responsible for, we had them removed. So we had no visibility over our budgets or what we were spending. 15 is the number of funding tools that NZNASCA had to work with to calculate the funding for residential, for people going into residential care. 43% is the increase in DSS eligible people between 2019 and 2023. And I can assure you, the revenue that NZNASCA are provided with to meet that demand has not gone up by 43% in that time frame. And actually, we've seen a significant increase in referrals between 2023 and today as well. March 2024, that fateful day, and August 2024 was the changes following the independent review. So March 2024, I'm sure it's all ingrained in everybody's memory. Those changes hit NZNASCA really hard. NZNASCA didn't agree with those changes, but we were still the ones that had to implement them. Everyone loves to point the finger at the NASCs, which is why they're... but as I pointed out to Louise Upston, we're the ones in people's homes having to explain why. We're the ones that look the people in the eye, and we're the ones that build the relationship with disabled people in their whānau. So it was a really, really difficult time for NASCs. This is a quote from somebody around that time. I would quit and get another job, but I know that disabled people don't get to walk away from this, so neither will I. And NASCA's role is to support the managers who supported their teams through this time, and for us to try and get clarity where there really was none. So, in August 2024, following the independent review, we agreed with all of the findings of the independent review. In fact, if you read our briefing to incoming minister when Louise Upston took over the post, you will see that most of what we asked for was in there. Then came the residential freeze. That was really tough. Again, we were stuck between a rock and a hard place. It was really, really hard for us to have to say no to people that we knew desperately needed residential support. We did get the budgets back, but they seemed impossible to meet, and we had some really strong language presented to NASCA about the implications for us not coming within those budgets. We've never had that before. So it was enormous pressure on the NASCs. But we did it, and it was tough, and we got through it. And actually, as the Minister did point out, the reason that people's flexible funding wasn't changed in April as they had predicted was because we'd managed to make an impact on the budget so that didn't need to happen. We definitely believe in a sustainable system. The path forward, the pace of change was just incredible. It is just incredible. So from December 2025, when the new residential pricing model came out, through to April 2026, so that's 5 months, including Christmas, pretty much everything we did changed. We had to do more financial forecasting, we had more accountability, there was a new assessment for residential, a new funding methodology for residential, new policies, new assessment for community-based support, new care planning, a new pre-assessment process, and new indicative ranges for allocations. So everything we do, essentially, has changed in that 5 months. Okay, so that's my plug for I just wanted to sort of express this has been a really difficult journey for us too. We feel we walk alongside you, and you may not feel like that, but we certainly, I don't know anybody in the NASCA world that gets up to make anybody's life more difficult. We are like the meat in the sandwich. We're the meat in so many sandwiches. Anyway, so let's talk about what we have now. That's what we're here for. So we now have a pre-assessment process, and this was implemented on the back of the consultation process where disabled people and their whānau expressed that they wanted more understanding of what to expect when an assessment was coming up. So now, as of March 1st, everybody who's having a new assessment or a reassessment, not a review, but a new assessment or a reassessment, will be sent information, standardised information to say what they can expect, how they can prepare, and what they should be thinking about for that assessment. So from there, the NASCA will come out and do the meeting, have a conversation with you, talk to you, gather all the information, ask you about what's going on for you in your lives, what's challenging, what might make it a little bit easier, what bits are challenging, what the impact is on the rest of the support network, gather all that information. Now, if it's looking like the disabled person is heading into residential, then we will complete the BAT, which is an acronym for the Band Allocation Tool. That goes through to a global pricing tool, which then comes up with the bed day rate, as it's called, for the residential provider. And then that's presented to the residential provider, and we start the entry process into residential care. If the person is staying in their own home and in the community, all that lovely information we gather from our chat goes into what's called the OBIA, which is the Outcome-Based Indicative Range tool. And from that, the information that's in the indicative range tool calculates a funding, and then with that funding, we develop that into the MyDSS funding plan. So that's when the conversation happens about, okay, we've got this funding, how do we want to best allocate that funding? What do we want to do? It might be individualised funding, it might be contracted services, it might be respite, a whole range of things that you could put that funding towards. So this, I don't expect you to be able to read this, but just so you can see this is what is generally referred to as the mind map. So this is the format around the conversation that we would have. So ideally, I'd like to think you got sent this with your pre-assessment information. You know, have a look at this, have a think about. These are the general topics of conversation we will be having when we come and visit you, and then. Or you get the opportunity to fill that in and provide that information. You can spend some time thinking about that. Then this is a screenshot of the web app tool. So this is the OBIA in full. And there's 4 different types, 4 different life stages. There's essentially the preschool, and then the primary and intermediate, the high school, and then the adults. There will be other life stages that come, but these are the 4 that are launched currently. And that's what the tool that we have to run. All that information we gather from both the mind map and the conversation, we enter it into the OBIA, and then when we finish that, we can download it, and we can download it in a mind map format, send it back to you, and say, okay, did we capture everything we discussed? Do you agree with what we've written down? So, pre-assessment we talked about. The consistency comes from, so this has been a source of some questioning, is what is the assessment? To my mind, the OBIA is not the assessment. The OBIA is the tool that you capture the information in. So the assessment is the conversation that we have, if there is indeed an assessment at all. Like, to me, I'm not wedded to what word we use to describe that interaction. But the consistency, the national consistency, that is important. So the national consistency is everybody will have the same information collected. How that information is collected might differ. So for me, going out and doing an assessment, I would have a conversation with somebody who is somebody who is an older person that might be a very conservative versus my next appointment might be a 19-year-old gang member. And I would have those conversations very differently. Very, very differently. So there's no cookie-cutter approach to how we gather that information. It still needs to be person-directed, but the consistency comes from the information that is collected and recorded in that OBIA. So everybody's indicative range is calculated based on the same information, but we might gather that information in a different way. The carer's needs are much more. There's much more detail collected in the OBIA about the experience of the carer, much more than there was previously. I mean, we've always talked about carers, we've always allocated respite for carers, but this means that inconsistency about whether the carer's needs are considered and how well the carer's needs are considered, that inconsistency is much less, because again, we all have to gather and input the same information about the carer into the OBIA. So there's much more consistency around that. There's much clearer budget planning, and there's improved support for individualised funders using, that I'm sure Jeanette will talk to you about shortly. Okay, so this is what a MyDSS funding plan looks like. I know that there's a lot of information in that. You'll have the slides, so I'm sure they'll be available. But basically, for every line of funding, an area of funding needs to be identified, and then a purpose of funding needs to be identified. So they are set. So we decide together. That's the royal we. The NASC and the disabled person and whānau decide together what the area of the funding is for and what the purpose of the funding is for, and then we break that down into units or whatever, and then that is passed on to the provider. So in individualised funding case, that's passed on to the host, who then can look to make sure that the funding has been used for the appropriate area and purpose. Okay. So individual, again, Jeanette will talk about this in much more detail, but there are 4 tiers. So the individualised, again, there was some inconsistency around IF providers, how much contact an IF provider had with the disabled person or their whānau, and this kind of standardises that as well. So there are 4 tiers based on experience using individualised funding, the size of the package, and how much support the person is likely to need. So the indicative ranges are generated from the information entered in the OBIA. Currently that's done external to the NASC, so it's currently done by DSS. There's some NASC personnel in that team, but it's a DSS overseen process. And it does exactly what it says. It gives an indication of the funding that is likely to be required. So across a population base, somebody with similar needs would get the same level of funding based on the OBIA. And they're saying this is the range that we think it would that the needs should be able to be met within that range to keep it consistent, so that you don't have what we've seen in the past, wildly varying package allocations for similar needs. The pre-approvals, there are 3 areas of pre-approvals. So complementary therapies, that's been I'll let Jeanette deal with that because
I'm covering that.
Yeah, she's covering that. The above thresholds, which is about what tier you're on, and overseas travel. They're the 3 key areas of pre-approvals, but I'll let Jeanette talk about that. What we need now, we've changed fatigue, is very real, but we still would like one consistent model for the country. There still isn't a consistent model across the whole country. We've still got CICL in some places and not others. We've still got the EGL models in 3 sites, but not across the country. We've got LACs in some areas and not in others. So we'd still like one consistent model for the country. We'd love there to be practice guidelines to tell us what we're supposed to be doing. That'd be great. We'd love a clear funding methodology for the supports in the region. So at the moment, each NASC is allocated a budget, but how that budget is generated is really unclear. So we need a clear funding methodology. We'd like a clear funding methodology for how NASC are funded too, because again, the funding that a NASC gets varies across the country. So back in 2024, we commissioned a review, and at that stage, the average was $750 per person per annum to operate NASC services. Now, because of that increase in funding, that's dropped. So in some areas, that's less than $500 per person per annum now. So it's pretty challenging to run a service on that sort of funding. So we'd like that looked at. We'd like a strategy to support service poverty. So what I mean by that, in some of the rural communities, you just can't get a service. So what are we going to do about that? What's the strategy to address that? And we'd love a clear workforce strategy. We're losing staff hand over fist because we just really struggle to pay them appropriately and for them to deal with the sort of pressure that comes from the change that we've experienced and doing the job that we do. But what we really need is patience while we figure this out. It's been quite the journey. So yeah, we're still trying to work this out in the absence of practice guidelines and in the absence of a lot of guidance. We're still trying to figure this out. And just because there wasn't enough change in the system, then we bring the disability bill submission. So just wanted to give you guys an idea of what NZNASCA's key themes for our submission were, and that was, we felt there was an over-reliance on the family far now unpaid workforce. So we've raised that as a concern. We've raised the lack of consideration of safeguarding in the bill as a concern. We've strongly raised the lack of an alignment with the UNCRPD, which we think is a given, or the United Nations Conventions for the Rights of People with Disabilities, which New Zealand signed up to. And we're also asking for, the Minister's been very clear, there'll be no changes to the eligibility at this stage, but what we're asking for is clearly defined eligibility and looking and making sure that the eligibility for health and disability align, that the eligibility for mental health and disability align, because at the moment there's a lot of people falling through gaps and there's a lot of not me, not me, not me, not me, and that needs to stop. So that's what we've put in our bill submission. Okay, that's all I wanted to say to you today. As I say, I wanted to leave a lot of time open for question. I have a question here that was sent through. Here's one that was prepared earlier. Sorry, glasses off, I can't read. So this is about, my child is likely to seek employment in the future. I'd like to understand what funding and support options may assist him with finding and maintaining suitable employment, transport to and from work and community activities, developing life skills and independence at home, ongoing support to enable him to live as independently as possible while still receiving assistance he needs. And then as parents and caregivers, what are the key things we should be doing to prepare for this transition? Are there any tips, strategies or common pitfalls to be aware of when seeking long-term funding and support to ensure continuity of services into adulthood? If there were any tips, strategies that I had, I'd be using them, because I've got a son in exactly this situation. I've got 20-year-old twins, both of them on the spectrum, and my son is more deeply immersed in the spectrum than my daughter, but he's in exactly this situation. Left school 18 months ago, and we're desperately trying to stop him regressing into playing PlayStation all day in a darkened room eating chips, which he would be happy to do. So that comes down to the areas and purposes that I talked about in the DSS funding plan. So when you're talking to your NASC, then that's the sort of thing that you need to be talking to them about. And there's things like community participation. I can't remember off the top of my head, Jeanette might know them better than I do. Supported employment is not a service that's accessed via the NASC, but there are supported employment providers for people with disabilities, and they're there to help the person develop a CV, develop interview skills, do covering letters, help them with the application. In an ideal world, there would be brokerage, so they'd go along to the employer and have a conversation. We haven't had much success with that personally, but interestingly, the MSD WINS have referred him to another service who's actually really good at that brokerage stuff. So we've actually found more success from the WINS service than we have from a specific disability service. But yeah, so that's the thing. It's like when you come up for a reassessment, it's thinking about what the purpose is, and that sort of community participation would be a big part of that. I hope that answers the question. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name's Alana. Obviously, just one more stand up there. Yeah. Loud. So just to clarify. So when you were talking about some more transparency around the funding, so is there any, in terms of the regional budgets and how they're allocated, is there any consideration of the percentage of the population in that area that have a disability?
I have no idea. And that's the problem. I have no idea. And I'm not sure they do either.
Right.
Is that being recorded?
I
don't know.
In the particular disability, I get the feeling that, for example, the Auckland people have access to more than.
The Auckland people are access
Yeah, that's my sense, but I'm not sure.
We work in both areas and I wouldn't say that was true.
No, I would agree. I don't.
In fact, I
that's-
think you're really well supported with your NAS down here than you are in Auckland, because they have got so many clients that the service they get isn't as personalised as they would hope. And we see the referrals and the amounts people get in Auckland.
I can certainly tell you that is, I can't comment on the support budget, but I can comment on the NASC. I can tell you that is definitely not true for the NASC.
Yeah.
Definitely not true.
And then the second, for the younger clients,
Mm.
is there any clarification, because we've been having some discussion with our therapists and paediatricians and things about the handling of global developmental delay?
Mm-hmm.
Because there appears to be some confusion about how the NASCs will accept global developmental delay as a diagnosis and how it's handled, and some of the tools that they've used in our region by the Child Development Service don't appear to be getting accepted by the NASCs.
Okay. So there is no, in these very old guidelines, there's no specific mention of global developmental delay. What it says is that young children who it's too early for them to have a definitive diagnosis of an intellectual disability, physical disability, and autism, that eligibility almost on a temporary basis can be allocated, until which time they're old enough for those diagnoses to be made. So that kind of is a bit of a limbo, because it's entirely possible that the child might get to 7, 8, 9, 10 and still not have a diagnosis, and that's when, according to the policy, we should be saying, you don't actually have an eligible diagnosis and you should have by now. So theoretically, we should be withdrawing the supports, but nobody wants to do that. But that's the basis upon which acceptance as a DSS eligible person is made. It's the prediction that they are heading towards an intellectual disability or a physical disability as they mature. So that gap, it's a recognition of the gap between a normal developmental pathway versus a disability developmental pathway. That gap widens as the child gets older. I certainly saw that with my two. When they were 6, Josh was just really a boisterous little boy, and then as he's aged, it's like, ooh, no, it's not just that, is it? And so now you look at him, and there's a big difference between a 20-year-old Josh and another 20-year-old.
The way it's being applied at the moment, as far as we can tell, and this has been confirmed with paediatricians and people we're talking about, is that in a younger child who's, say, under 7 or 8 or whatever, they're not actually accepting the diagnosis of global developmental delay unless they can prove that they are going to go on to have, for example, intellectual disability. But the child is actually too young for that clinical additional diagnosis to be made or suggested.
Okay.
So that's a very difficult area, and so they won't actually acknowledge the global developmental delay unless you can kind of say that they're likely to have something else that clinically you can't assess for yet.
Okay, I'll tell you that there's 3 levels of eligibility. So the first level of eligibility is, are you eligible to receive publicly funded health and disability services in New Zealand? Okay, that's one. The second level is, do you have a diagnosis or do you have a presenting issue that would meet the eligibility of either intellectual disability, physical disability, sensory disability, or autistic spectrum disorder. They're the 4 DSS criteria for being eligible for DSS services. The third one is there a presence of a reduced level of functioning as a result of the condition that has meant you're eligible for DSS services. So that's the third and probably the most challenging one to identify. So it's less with children that are unable to be diagnosed with an intellectual disability. That's the key. So it's the key is there signs or are there needs that are specifically disability related that are over and above the support needs that you would expect of a child at the same age and stage. So that's your 3 levels of disability. Sorry, 3 levels of eligibility. Any other?
Some families I feel are concerned at the moment, they get a global government play, and then you've got to go and get an assessment done, so you've got an ID, so they get to December 8, it's like, I need to get this done. Because I think they're going to lose some funding. So some families are really
There's no age. There's no age in the criteria. So we use 7, 8, that kind of age, but there's no in the policy there is no defined age.
Lots of children have gone through and they've got to they're 16, 17, and they've still got a global birth, and then
Yes.
asked to go and get it done.
And that's the problem, is that we've kind of there are some examples where we've got adults that have got global developmental delay. That's not okay. You know, like we shouldn't have adults that have still got eligibility based on global developmental delay diagnosis. So I think it's finding the right time to go, we need to actually get some definitive idea of what this person's eligibility is, but at the same time we also recognise it's really hard to get that diagnosis done. It's hard to find the services that will do that diagnosis, and there is an avenue through Explore, massive wait list. So yes, but we recognise that is definitely an issue.
Can they be referred for education?
See, the trouble with education is we quite often get pushback from education and go, well, we don't need a diagnosis. Education doesn't need a diagnosis, so why would we do the assessment? Because, but there's a memorandum of understanding when ASD was accepted under disability back in 2014. There was a memorandum of understanding made between mental health but also the conversation happened with education. So back then, education agreed that they would support the diagnosis with children, as did mental health, CAMS. Well, I think we can all say that that's kind of evaporated over time. But that does exist. That agreement existed. But yes, it's challenging. We acknowledge that. Is that it? Oh, okay. I normally don't get off that easy.
No, amazing. So I run a charity that supports neurodivergent parents. And we have found a lot of parents, particularly in Tauranga, with children who have an autism diagnosis, that the NZNASCA has declined any kind of assessment, not even willing to do an assessment, because the paperwork's not right, or there's something, the wording in the report is not what they don't. So they've been declining autism for assessment in the last few years. Can we reapply?
What I would suggest you do is, if this is available, go onto the DSS website and look for the assessment criteria. There's a document that's the assessment criteria for intellectual disability, and there's also in the autism guidelines 2022?
I don't know.
Don't know. So there should be a link to it on the DSS website, and that outlines what the diagnostic criteria for ASD is. So there's a couple of issues there. Like, I used to work with a paediatrician who used to say, I spray a diagnosis. These were his words. I spray a diagnosis of ASD over my patients so that they can access NZNASCA services. And it's like, oh, it's not helpful, mate. So that's the sort of issue that we've been facing. That also the online diagnosis, DSS have been very clear, they've shut that down. So online diagnosis for ASD will not be accepted. So there are some quite clear guidelines about what the diagnosis for ASD needs to include.
It needs to include levels now, doesn't it? Like, I don't know, where I was level 1, 2 or 3, you know.
That's for the DSM-5.
There's always, they were collapsed in DSM-5. Yeah.
But when people have the definitive diagnosis and it meets the diagnostic criteria that is
Mhm.
accepted, but their referrals were declined
Okay.
under the time of great shortage in funding and fewer people were being allowed into the system, NJ's question is, should those families now reconcile?
Okay. Even in the times of tight funding, the decline would not have been based on the tight funding. The decline is based on eligibility. So I would say have a look at those referrals. Make sure that the diagnosis matches. There's two things you need to make sure. Make sure the diagnosis matches what is required in the autism guidelines, and make sure there's a clearly identified support need over and above a child of the same age and stage. Those are the two things that the NASC need to see in order to accept the referral.
Just a bit of a pivot. When you're doing your assessments and your tools that you use, are you using AI to spit out any results?
No.
Or
There you go.
thank you. And okay, but they're still computer generated, right? With the information that you put in.
I don't know that I'd go that far. I would say there are algorithms within a system that goes, if you get this score on that, and that score on that, and that score on that, other people in the country that are getting scores like that, the average allocation is this, and therefore that's, so it's algorithms rather than computer generated. So no, there's no AI. We are looking at, and this goes across all NASCs, we're looking at using something like Heidi to record the conversation, obviously with consent, record the conversation and scribe. But then of course we look over it and make sure it's all got in the right boxes, and that before we send it back to you guys to go, yes, that looks like that, we agree with that, that's what they said. So that's the only piece of AI that I'm aware of that's being looked at is just a scribe. In the same way that your GP uses it if you go to the GP, and so they can look at it and have a conversation rather than being like that.
And then just a different question. Obviously this process kind of results in individualised funding, which is what we're talking about today. Yeah. Process completely the same for carer support funding though?
So for carer support funding, it is the same, but the only difference is those three criteria that if you are using your carer support funding for complementary therapies, if it's over a certain threshold or if it's for overseas travel, because there's no host involved, the NASC has to approve that, which is new territory for us as well. We've never had to approve funding before. So hosts and NASCs are working together at the moment to how we can make sure there's consistency around that decision-making process as well.
And that's $1,500, isn't it? Is it over $1,500 for the cut-off?
Jeanette will talk.
Have you got that?
There's 500 if you're level 4, and if you're level 2, 3, 1, it's 1,500. But there is other exceptions to that, which I've got on you.
Okay, jump ahead, sorry.
It's all right, it's all good.
Oh, didn't need to wear my armour-plated undies after all. Cool. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, my details, if you go onto the NASCA website, my details are on there, so feel free to flip me an email if you have any questions. Kiara. Thank you.